look how I contribute to society, to the nation, to the country, to the tax base, to the government. Like, look how I finance the government. It's a concession that is deadly, because what it ends up doing is telling Mamdani, yeah, you have the right ideas. We should be paying our fair share.
And Animal Farm is a short novella that is a book about the evil of Stalinism, the evil of communism. But it is not a book against socialism. Orwell was a pronounced socialist. In the video announcing a non-primary luxury home tax, New York's Mayor Zohran Mamdami singled out Ken Griffin, Citadel's CEO, as one of the primary targets of that tax. Griffin responded, calling the video creepy and frightening, and responded with a threat to withdraw his business from the city that doesn't welcome success or embrace business. In addition, Griffin said he will send Animal Farm, a novel about George Orwell, to every ninth grader in New York, presumably to educate them against the failings of socialism. Today, we analyze Griffin's reaction and what is the appropriate stance that anybody in Griffin's position should take against attacks like Mamdani's on their wealth and their lives. Welcome to Ayn Rand Institute Podcast. I'm Robertas Bakula, and with me today is Onkar Ghate. Onkar, I want to start with Mamdani's attack, so we have the context of what is Griffin responding to. So,
I think it's important to start with that and for people to see what Mamdani actually said.
Let's take a look at the video, and then we'll analyze it from there.
When I ran for mayor, I said I was going to tax the rich. Well, today, we're taxing the rich. I'm thrilled to announce we've secured a pied-à-terre tax, the first in New York's history. This is an annual fee on luxury properties worth more than $5 million, whose owners do not live full-time in the city. Like for this penthouse, which hedge fund CEO Ken Griffin bought for $238 million. This pied-à-terre tax is specifically designed for the richest of the rich, those who store their wealth in New York City real estate, but who don't actually live here. But even so, they're able to reap the huge financial rewards of owning property in, dare I say, the greatest city in the world. And most of the time, these units are sitting empty, since again, they don't actually live here. This is a fundamentally unfair system that hurts working New Yorkers. Now, it's coming to an end. This tax will raise at least $500 million directly for the city. It'll help fund things like free childcare, cleaner streets, and safer neighborhoods. As mayor, I believe everyone has a role to play in contributing to our city, and some a little bit more than others. Happy Tax Day, New York.
So, the tax in itself is not a surprise, coming from a vocal socialist who campaigned on the idea of taxing the rich. And in this video, he's clearly announcing it to the base that elected him, that he's doing what he was elected for. And it's also not surprising because it's only one of the instances of the wave of attempts to extract more wealth from the highest earners. In this podcast, we already covered California's proposal to tax billionaires in a wealth tax. Massachusetts has a 4% surtax on income over 1 million. Maine just passed a 2% surtax on income over 1 million. Washington just passed a capital gains tax on over 1 million. And Rhode Island is debating to do the same. So this is just one of the instances. It's not surprising. But the way it was announced triggered a response that is worth analyzing and is different than in any other case. So this video, Onkar, what are your initial thoughts on how Mamdani goes about making his case?
Yeah, as you said, it's not coming out of the blue. There's all kinds of proposals all over the place. We talked about the California one in a previous podcast, but I don't think what Mamdani is doing is trying to talk. I think he's very much talking to his base and not about the details of this tax policy. It's much more, look, I campaigned that I'm going to go after the rich. And look, you voted me into office, and look what I'm doing. I'm going after the rich. And it's not an accident then that he's standing outside the Griffin's building, putting it in the video. This is the kind of thing and the kind of person I'm going after. So that someone would feel like you're targeting me, and that rich people will feel like, like we're being made a scapegoat for everybody's problems. In the same way, if you think of it sort of on the other side of the political spectrum of what we have right now of our elected officials, I think of it's exactly like Trump saying about immigrants and the crackdowns and some of the brutal crackdowns. Well, look, I campaigned that I was going to go after immigrants. You voted me in because of that, and now I'm going after immigrants. So why are you complaining? You should be cheering this on. And I think Mamdami's video is very much, you should be cheering me on because I'm doing what I said I would do, and I'm going to go after the rich and I'm going to target them.
And I think being targeted, Griffin should be afraid, and he's right to be afraid, and he's right to call this video frightening and creepy. He said in his response, one of the things he said at first is that this video can agitate political extremists and create a severe security risk. And given New York's recent and not so recent history too, I think the threat to his life and to his safety is real, and especially in today's climate. We know that just a few blocks away, Brian Thompson, CEO of the United Healthcare, was killed, and with a widespread positive support following the killing. New Yorkers also condoned the killing of Wesley Lipatner, a Blackstone executive. And if there is anyone more hated than healthcare CEOs today, it's financiers, which Ken Griffin is. Financiers faced violence for a long time in New York. In 1920, JP Morgan headquarters were bombed. In 1970, Chase Manhattan Bank was damaged by a bomb. Occupy Wall Street movement maybe didn't end up in real violence, but people like Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan were intimidated by demonstrators in front of their house, which Ken Griffin now faces with his address publicly targeted by a mayor. And we've been talking about rise of political violence and politicians condoning violence and effectively even laying ground now around it. So from Elizabeth Warren to AOC, and recently the New York Times podcast, reactions and non-condemnation of violence like the killing of a healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, sends a message. Something like the protest and the violence is understandable in some ways. People's hatred or anger towards the corporate leaders and the wealthy is in some way understood or explains the violence at least. So when another Luigi-like, Mangione-like killer decides to lurk around Ken Griffin's penthouse that Mamdani singles out in Manhattan and tries to damage it, shoot it, or do something to it, Mamdani, my take is that Mamdani should take responsibility for this.
Yeah, he doesn't have sole responsibility, but you have some responsibility. And that's one of the, I think it's good that Griffin spoke out. There's a courage in speaking out. And just this element, there's more to what he said. We'll get to that in a minute. But just this element that there's a growing climate of blaming the rich for all our problems, and a kind of idea might not always be said out loud, though sometimes it will be like abolish billionaires, but sometimes it will just be, well, sort of between the lines. They're the source of all our problems, and what's between the lines. So if we got rid of them, our problems would disappear. And one way of getting rid of them is taxing them out of existence, but another way is just to kill them. And this is part of the atmosphere in which we're living. And as you said, the atmosphere means some actual attacks and a lot of threats. So, and that you would watch this video and think, like, this is helping put a target on my back. Yeah, that's a reasonable reaction to the video. And it's good to call Mamdani out for that.
The other aspect to which Ken Griffin reacts is not only the real threat to his actual life, but to the threat to his way of life and to his business too. So he criticizes New York and under Mamdani for favoring redistributed handouts. And he says that the policies will leave people dependent on the government instead of dependent on their own work and success and achievement. And he threatened that he will take his business, he might take his business, or at least portion of it, and projects and developments out of New York, and now started to thinking about expanding more in Miami, which as a state that welcomes business more than New York, in Griffin's words. So one of the quotes I want to read that you, Onkar, pointed out to me in Griffin's response as important is he says that, quote, we want to be in a state that embraces business, that embraces education, that embraces personal freedom and liberty, and that embraces people having the opportunity to live the American dream. So his response is, in a sense, as I understand it, at least he intends to say, is that Mamdani's attack is not just an attack on him, it's an attack on an American dream, on the way of life that America is supposed to protect, of earning the wealth through productive virtue, enjoying your life, living free with that wealth that you've built, and without the need to justify your existence, your work, and your success to any of these people, whether Mamdani or his supporters. So that sounds, Onkar, you mentioned to me that like another good aspect of how Griffin responded to the threat.
Yes, I think it's right to activate the things that he's activating, because this is what Mamdani and the socialism are against. They are against the American system, and the system of personal freedom, personal liberty, the American dream, what that means. And it's good to remind ourselves about it on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration. The Declaration is seen as giving abstract statement to the American dream. And the American dream is a dream that individuals can live as individuals, free, productive, thoughtful, not at the mercy of other people's actions, envy, jealousy, or even just failures. Like the fact that other people fail or aren't doing well is not a claim on your time, on your money, on your wealth. So the American dream meant you've got individual rights, and you have to stress in this day and age, it was individual. I've got a right to think for myself, live for myself, produce and earn and keep the property that I create. That's what when Jefferson says in the Declaration, to secure these rights, those were the rights that government is instituted to secure. And in that sense, the government is the servant of the individual, not the master, not something that the individual has to think, what contributions have I made to the government and to the nation and to the country? This was a nation for and of the individual. And so the American dream, if you want, again, using the language of the Declaration, it's the pursuit of happiness. But that meant your own personal, individual happiness. You get to do that in America. And if we have a country that's living up to the Declaration of personal freedom and liberty for everyone, then everybody gets to do that. Everybody gets to pursue their own happiness. So it's the right things to advocate and to say in response to Mamdani's socialism in the abstract. And it takes some courage in the present environment, and in the way the business is being scapegoated, to come out and say that openly, publicly. Like, it's something good and something Griffin should be commended on doing this. But there's a problem in that he doesn't really apply those abstract ideas and abstract principles to his own situation, to his own life, and in defense of what he's done, given the attacks that Mamdani and Mamdami's base are putting on him and every rich person in New York City.
And I suspect you mean that by not applying to his person is that the way he defends his business and his productive achievement and what he has built, his wealth he has built, is more of an appeal towards the taxes he already paid, the jobs he created, the philanthropy that he has done. So, for example, Citadel's COO that came in the defense of Griffin wrote a memo to the company, and in that memo, the big bulk of text is about how much money Citadel paid in taxes, jobs it created, money it spent, how different ways it gave to the community, and how much Griffin personally gives to charity. So the argument from both Citadel and Griffin comes out to be something like the wealthy shouldn't pay up for their success or justify their existence because they already do. So it's, in a sense, it's not really an argument that they shouldn't, but that maybe you were asking too much at this point. And very similarly, Stephen Roth came out in Griffin's defense, and Stephen Roth is of Vornado Realty Trust, a real estate company. And he slammed Mamdani for his dangerous and, he said, ugly, unnecessary video stunt. And he used the same phrase that Griffin used, that people like Griffin are, quote, the epitome of the American dream, who should be praised and thanked. And yet at the same time, in the same breath, Rav says that Mamdani is young, smart, energetic, and with a little tweak here and a little tweak there, his leadership could make this great city even greater. So he commends Mamdani, and he says that maybe he should just make some adjustments here and there, not to antagonize people like Griffin and himself. And that clearly didn't work, because the mayor's press secretary response was, look, we welcome success, we welcome business owners and entrepreneurs like Griffin, but they have to pay their fair share like everyone else. And right now, our tax system is broken. So we're making this tweak here and there so that we can continue all live in harmony in our great city. So this seems like what's not being applied here is this idea that no, they have a right to their wealth and the right to their production without needing to justify it by the payments to Mamdani and the like. But what do Griffin and Rav, do you think, Onkar, have in response to this idea that, well, all we're asking is you pay your fair share, not something extra?
Yeah, they don't have any real response to that. The way I think of it is when they start talking about their own individual business success, they will not put that in the terms of personal freedom, personal liberty, the American dream, that I was pursuing my happiness as other people, whether you're a lawyer in a firm, owner of a small business, a computer programmer, everyone when you think of sort of the dynamism of New York City, they're pursuing their own individual dreams. They're after advancing their life, their happiness, part of which includes making money, making profits, and so on. And that, like, why should he feel any need to downplay that, to not mention it, or to mention other things? So that giving to charity is the opposite of making profits. And that's what comes across to people rightly, because I think in the end it's apologetic. I think it's a kind of utilitarian perspective, which is not the American perspective. The American dream and the Declaration of Independence is not, oh, we need a government so we can achieve the greatest happiness of the greatest number, and if you have to sacrifice for the greatest happiness of the greatest number, you should be eager and willing to do it. Like, that's what utilitarianism said. That's what John Stuart Mill, is one of the fathers of it, said. That's not what America is about. That's a collectivist perspective. Look how I contribute to society, to the nation, to the country, to the tax base, to the government. Like, look how I finance the government. That's what justifies, look at the taxes we've paid. And so, and there is a point to saying some of that, but only in the context of where you're really trumpeting your own right to pursue your life, your property, your happiness. And that's, like, as I said, Griffin will say that in the abstract, that's what America is about, but won't apply it to his own business and to his own life. And that's the sense in which it's a concession. And it's a concession that is deadly, because what it ends up doing is telling Mamdani, yeah, you have the right ideas. We should be paying our fair share. This is it doesn't really belong to us. It belongs to everybody else. But look how much we've already given to everybody else. Why are you coming to take more? But there's no answer. For instance, what's your fair share? So, for instance, take it back to the level of the tax that Mamdani's video is about. It's not as though Griffin doesn't pay property taxes in New York City. This is an extra tax. And it's, since the tax is a percentage, he bought the condo for, it was something like 239 million or something like that. Mm-hmm. If you pay like 1% in property taxes and your thing's valued at 239 million, you pay 2.39 million in tax. And And then there's the complaint, well, he doesn't live in New York City. So you really think he's taking 2.39 million worth of government services? Like, why is he not paying his fair share? But all fair share means is you don't really deserve the money. It's not really yours. We should and have the right to take as much of it as we want. And now we're in a budget crisis and so on. So we have to take more. And what's fair is we take more because you are really a servant of the people and of the city. And so like that's and they're reinforcing that perspective and just saying, oh no, haven't we already paid enough? And haven't we served the cause enough?
This reminds me, Ayn Rand had a conception of a phenomena like that when a victim that's being under attack concedes to their attackers that in some sense they are right. In some sense, their ideas, their attack has a legitimate goal or a legitimate premise behind it. And she called it the sanction of the victim. And in Ayn Rand's conception, in her philosophy, the idea is that by conceding that, you are empowering your destroyers. You're giving them the power that they wouldn't have had without your concession if you actually stood up for yourself fully for in your defense, rather than giving them a little bit, trying to satisfy their demands even by a bit. Onkar, is there more to that conception, the sanction of a victim? It's a unique conception that Ayn Rand has. Can you say more about how does this apply in this case or more broadly?
Yeah, that it's her. So this is a theme in her greatest novel, Atlas Shrugged. And part of the way it's put there is that when you see the defeat of an individual of virtue or of a good person, what you'll see as part of how that defeat worked is they paved the way for their own victimhood. So the sanction of the victim is you're the victim. You're being exploited in some sense. You're being treated unjustly, badly, wrongly. And instead of saying, I'm being treated badly, unjustly, wrongly, you say in some way or another, well, the people who are treating me badly, wrongly, are actually in the right. Well, but that means that I'm actually in the wrong and should be being treated badly. So I'm not actually being treated unjustly because I'm in the wrong and they're in the right. And so here, the more you reinforce, no, but what Mamdani is saying, and that you should pay your fair share, and that maybe you haven't paid enough, and really everything belongs to the state, and we decide how much we need. And of course, the people in need are the people who actually deserve the money. That's part of when anyone activates charity. It's, look, we give to people in need because they're really the ones who morally deserve that. And the more you do that, the more you're given credence, you're given support, you're given sanction. So that means your approval of the ideas that are actually opposed to you, to your life, to your goals, to what you're trying to achieve. So you might think you're fighting, but by conceding sort of the basic framework that says, no, but your opponents are in the right, you're in the wrong, you're undermining yourself and you're going to end in defeat. Like it's ultimately going to end in defeat.
And I think the biggest evidence that this is what Griffin has done, in a sense, is that he recommended or said that he would sponsor an Animal Farm, the novella by George Orwell, to every ninth grader in New York. And Animal Farm is a short novella that is a book about the evil of Stalinism, evil of communism. But it is not a book against socialism, which presumably Griffin presented it to be. He said in his the way he presented it, it's supposed to be an antidote to the ideas that Mamdani holds. But as we were discussing before the podcast, Onkar, Mamdani would celebrate people reading Animal Farm, of course, because Orwell was a pronounced socialist. That's not a controversial idea. He was not anti-socialism, and someone like Mamdani is a representative of a leader that I think Orwell and Animal Farm would celebrate. So by recommending Animal Farm, I don't know, Onkar, if you want to talk about the plot of Animal Farm, but it's not a controversial idea that Animal Farm is a pro-socialism but anti-communism book, as much as you can have that not anti-socialism or pro-capitalism book. And by recommending it, Griffin is sanctioning the ideas that give rise to something like tax the rich, make them pay their fair share, or that they're responsible for the evils that the animals and the failures that the animal farm is facing in the novel. What's your take on the novella itself, or recommendation of it?
Yeah, this is a crucial issue, and let me just say something a little bit about what we do at ARI. So one of our recent initiatives is the Atlas, what we're calling the Atlas Circle, where we're trying to bring together businessmen and intellectuals and see the ways in which each can benefit the other. And this is an instance of, as I said, like, I think Griffin is trying to push back, is right to try to push back against Mamdani, and is showing some real courage in trying to oppose this, and to do it in publicly, not just behind closed doors, but saying there's something wrong here. But what the sanction of the victim means for Ayn Rand, and again, this is part of the story in Atlas Shrugged, is you can give support to your enemies, to your destroyers, or the people trying to destroy you, without even knowing it. Indeed, even when you think what you're doing is fighting them or opposing them. And this is like a textbook instance of that. I'm sure when you read the news stories, Griffin's point of, like, I'll pay for the books, I'll ship them, just give me the addresses of the schools. It's that, yeah, I'm going to get anti-socialist ideas in the hands of school children. But as you said, Orwell, and this is not at all controversial, Orwell was a democratic socialist. That's often how it would be labeled, in exactly the same way that Mamdani would label himself a democratic socialist. And you put it, it will sometimes be put like this, that Animal Farm and Orwell more broadly is anti, sort of, not anti-socialism, but anti-communism. I don't even think that's true. I think if you take the ideals of communism as they were preached, and especially equality, Orwell's on that side. He was against, and Animal Farm will often be described as anti-Stalinism, and Stalinism as perverting communism or socialism. And I mean, in terms of theory, the communism just is like the end point of socialism, where you don't even need the state anymore. It withers away, and then but it's for all practical purposes, they're the same thing. They're the ideals that they preach. And it was that Stalin is distorting these ideas and ideals. So it's very much like, I think one way to think about it is of what they said about the Islamic terrorists after 9/11. They've hijacked a great religion. What Islam preaches is great. The way that these people are practicing it leaves something to be desired, to say the least. And Orwell is very much like communism, socialism. What is preached in theory is good. It's right. But someone like Stalin has distorted it and perverted it. And what we need then to go back to is true socialism, true communism. That's what really needs to be implemented. And it doesn't need an authoritarian figure and a dictator, or certainly a totalitarian regime in the way that you get with Stalin. And so 1984 is very much about totalitarianism. What you need is a kind of peaceful, democratically elected socialism, which Mamdani will say, like, that's exactly what I am. I won the vote for New York City on these ideals, and now I'm putting them into practice, and I'm not marching people off to gulags and so on. So it's not just that Animal Farm and more broadly promoting Orwell. You're not opposing Mamdani. It's much worse than that, because you're actually giving support, sanction, voice, and your money to the promotion of socialist ideals. And particularly, if you, one way to hold it for today's debate is that we need radical equality. And so you brought up I think I forget if you brought up earlier the Occupy Wall Street in terms of I mean, that was about what we need it's the egalitarian conception of equality. Everybody needs to be equal. Inequality is a big issue. And if you think back to Mamdami's video, it's, yeah, like you and me, we're working here on the streets, we're living paycheck to paycheck. This guy's living in this on top of this skyscraper, and he pays 200 million for a place. It's like, this is the massive inequality we have, and this is what I'm starting to rectify by putting taxes on the super rich and so on. And if you're going to send out books that promote like this idea, this equality means this radical equality of results, you're not helping your cause, and it's not even like futile. You're helping destroy what you think is good.
If Griffin actually wanted an alternative, we here at Ayn Rand have another program, which is books for teachers and books for students. And Anthem, a short novella that Ayn Rand wrote, is like about as short as Animal Farm, maybe even shorter. Could be a better alternative to send to ninth graders. We already do that. If he wants more, we could help out with that. But ultimately, and maybe not for ninth graders, but ultimately it's the book that we already mentioned, Atlas Shrugged, is a much more longer novel, but it is the one that actually portrays people like Griffin and people of productive virtue as heroes, and actually provides an alternative to the ideas and to the socialist ideas and to the morality that gives the rise to those ideas, the morality of altruism that underlies socialism and the egalitarianism that you, Onkar, was just talking about. And it shows this exact issue of how a sanction empowers the destroyers of these productive heroes, productive heroes in the book. So there's definitely, if not a much better alternative in all respects to Orwell, and that's Ayn Rand.
And you could think of it as it's opposing Orwell. And Ayn Rand was opposed to Orwell. She had very negative comments about Animal Farm, for instance. And the way in which it's opposing Orwell, as I said, a way you can think of what he's saying is communism and socialism are good in theory. We just failed to practice them properly, or Stalin failed, and we have to oppose when someone like Stalin is around and not champion him. What Ayn Rand's argument is that socialism and communism are evil in theory, not good in theory. They're evil in theory, and therefore have to lead to evil and destruction in practice. And then she has a perspective of what is actually good in theory, and it's much closer to the American ideal, or you can think of it as the American ideal, stripped of its errors, of its inconsistencies, of its concessions to past wrong views. So it's like she's fully American is a way to think of it. And so a champion of happiness, of freedom, of production, of industry. So she paints a positive, the kind of positive that I think actually animates Griffin, and that he should be trying to give intellectual voice to. And the way to do it is through Ayn Rand, not through Orwell.
The last question I have for you, Onkar, and this is bothering me as I think about this issue, is what would happen if people like Griffin would take a more principled stance that we're analyzing or recommending today? So on one hand, yes, we're saying today that what he said was already courageous and good. His response, that he's standing up for himself, but he's responding, is good. But in another sense, he's conceding and appealing to his destroyers by saying, I'm already doing a lot of what you asked me to do. Just please stop asking me to do more. By empower, and we said that he's empowering them in that way. But if he took a more principled stance, a stronger stance that we're recommending, he might be more effective, maybe in a cause of fighting against people like Mamdani and his supporters. But he would also, wouldn't he be putting a little bit of his life more in jeopardy than it already is? Like he would attract more attention, he would attract more criticism, and who knows how much more he would agitate his critics by taking more stronger stance. And the last thing I would like to do is to recommend him to be a martyr and sort of put whatever's left of his self-interest in life that he can live and values that he can pursue even more at risk. I don't think that's what a philosophy of self-interest tells you to do or recommends you to do. You shouldn't just go sacrifice yourself for some kind of a cause. You should fight for your values. So, Onkar, can you help me think through how, if at all, that stronger, more principled stance on Griffin's part would help him actually defend his values rather than put them more in jeopardy?
Yeah, particularly in this case, I think the first thing to notice is he's already spoken out publicly. So if you're worried about, well, I'm going to become a martyr or I might bring sort of more publicity to myself, he's already done that by speaking out. And I think there is something courageous in him doing that, but something good that if you are trying to fight both bad ideas and bad causes and for better ideas and better causes, if you're not willing to speak up, and sometimes when there will be some risk involved, you can't expect other people to speak up or to speak up for you. That he would think, like, in this kind of case, like, I'm being singled out, I'm being attacked unjustly, I'm made a kind of scapegoat, and there's a kind of persecution here of rich people, and I'm one of them. I'm the target here. I'm going to defend myself. I think that's an act of self-assertion, of self-esteem, and of self-interest. That you still have the freedom and the power to speak out, to try to oppose these kinds of policies, and you should do that. And that's what he's doing. So the real issue is, are you doing that effectively or not? And it's true that if he, in the way that we're saying, if he had a more consistent, principled, pro-American case, and that's what he was arguing for and actively defending, he would be more effective in opposition, I think. So that probably would make him a bit more of a target of people like Mamdani and his supporters. It would be, oh, here's someone who doesn't just sort of roll over and doesn't compromise and make concessions, so he's a more challenging opponent. But by the virtue of doing that, Griffin would win all kinds of support, I think. America is not yet a place that everybody hates the rich. It's just America doesn't know how to think about the rich, had been taught in school, in their churches, everywhere, that the rich are evil. There's something, like, if you say that you're rich or a billionaire, there's something, you're sort of tainted by this, and you have to prove that you're not corrupt, that you haven't done all kinds of things that are bad. So you have this kind of shadow cast on you. And the more that actual rich, productive people who've made their businesses and their fortunes and so on would speak out, and speak out openly and proudly, not that they're better than everyone, but they're not worse, and they're certainly not morally worse, that I want to pursue my happiness and I'm trying to do it and I'm achieving it in all kinds of ways, just as you, my fellow Americans, should be doing that. And if businessmen said that, they would win all kinds of support. And from that perspective, it would make it it would be much harder to make this person a martyr, because it would be clear, look, but then you're alienating a significant portion of the country who still respects achievement, American business, American enterprise, and would respect someone who speaks proudly about these things.
I think maybe we haven't stressed this enough in the podcast, but it's clear to me, and I think there is no question, that Griffin has been extremely productive and successful in creating value for his businesses, whether it's his hedge fund or the securities business. He started those companies in the dorm room and built them up to incredibly successful companies that provide so much value in the investing capital and allocating it efficiently. So for that, he should be celebrated. He should celebrate that. And like Ruff said, we should thank them and look up to them, but do it fully and consistently, not apologetically in any way. So I hope Ken Griffin sees it and hears our support to him, and inspires him to support himself even more strongly than he already does. Thank you, Onkar, for talking to me about this issue. Thank you, our listeners, for listening and watching. You can subscribe, comment, or share on this video or on our social media like Facebook. Send comments, questions to newideal and aynrand.org. And otherwise, see you next time.